Hey everyone, welcome back to The Explainer. So, if you're the kind of person who really loves to unpack the deep layers of history, literature, and, well, human nature, you are absolutely in the right place. Today, we're exploring a seriously monumental piece of literature. It's a text that actually repurposed an ancient epic to process a very real, very modern trauma. We're talking about Dharamvir Bharati's 1953 masterpiece, Andha Yug. This play didn't just make waves, it fundamentally changed the entire landscape of modern performance art in India. And honestly, its message? It's just as urgent right now as it was decades ago. Okay, let's dive right into this. Listen to this haunting verse straight from the text. When will this bloodbath end? Oh, what a war which no one wins and loses both foe and friend. Wow, that immediately sets the tone for our whole exploration, doesn't it? It's this visceral, anti-war cry that sits at the very core of Bharati's work. It completely strips away any of that glory or romance we usually associate with massive ancient battles, and it just leaves us with the raw, devastating reality of conflict. So, to really understand how we arrive at this point of total despair, let's move into part one, the age of blindness. We need to set up the incredibly grim world of this 1953 verse play. Let's actually start with the title itself, Andha Yug. In Hindi, this translates to the age of blindness or the blind age. But this isn't just a literal description. It's a profound metaphor. It directly references the physical blindness of King Dhritarashtra, who's a central figure in the story. But more importantly, it represents the moral decay and the ideological blindness of an entirely dispirited society. It forces us to ask, what actually happens when a society just closes its eyes to its own cruelty? The actual setting of the play brings that blindness right to life. The story unfolds on the 18th and final day of the great Mahabharata war. But the once magnificent capital city of Hastinapur isn't celebrating some grand victory. Instead, it lies burning in ruins. The battlefield of Kurukshetra is completely strewn with corpses, and the skies above are literally described as being filled with vultures and death laments. And the survivors? They aren't relieved. They're consumed by this toxic mix of grief and rage, just locked in this endless cycle of blaming each other.
But here's the thing. Bharati wasn't just writing about ancient mythology. That brings us to section 2, Echoes of the Partition. We need to look at the profound real-world context that directly inspired this masterpiece.
And this brilliantly illustrates the dual layers at work here. On one hand, sure, we have the epic destruction of the legendary Kaurava and Pandava kingdoms. But when we look a little deeper, we see the true catalyst for this work, the 1947 partition of India. You see, Bharati wrote this 5-act tragedy in the years immediately following the horrific atrocities of the partition. He basically took the total annihilation seen in the ancient epic and used it as a direct allegory for the destruction of human lives, national identity, and ethical values that he was witnessing in his own time. The core anti-war allegories of the text are incredibly clear. Bharati is essentially giving us a metaphoric meditation on the politics of violence and aggressive selfhood. He shows us that in the end, both the victor and the vanquished lose. Nobody really wins. War fundamentally dehumanizes individuals and society as a whole. We see this relentless cycle of blame where absolutely no one is willing to accept any moral responsibility for their choices. Ultimately, he's saying that ethics and humanity become the very first casualties of the conflict, long before the final weapons are even drawn. So, how exactly does a playwright even structure such a massive, heavy allegory? Let's break that down in section 3, Anatomy of a Tragedy, where we'll explore how Bharati uniquely blended different theatrical traditions to deliver his message. Let's move to the structure and see how this builds. Bharati actually constructed Andha Yug by fusing Western drama traditions with ancient Indian, specifically Sanskrit drama. It flows very logically. It starts with a prologue, then moves through Acts 1 to 3, which really detail the making of the beast and the half-truths of war. Then an interlude separates the narrative before plunging us into Acts 4 and 5, which are super intense, focusing on curses, empty victories, and suicides. Finally, it concludes with a really sobering epilogue. This structured pacing practically forces the audience to sit with the escalating consequences of a society that has entirely lost its moral compass. When we examine the key players, the thematic contrasts are just incredibly stark. First, you have Ashwatthama, who, in a final act of revenge, releases the Brahmastra, the ultimate weapon promising total annihilation. He literally represents the absolute extreme of retaliation. Then there's King Dhritarashtra, physically blind and blinded by ambition for his son, who entirely fails to stop the violence. But in sharp contrast to them, we have Krishna. Krishna acts as the moral center of the play. Even amidst all this failure and mindlessness, he mediates between the feuding cousins and reminds society that an ethical, redemptive path is always accessible, even in the absolute worst of times.
Having unpacked the text and the characters, it's time to look at the real-world history. This is Section 4, From Radio to Ruins. Let's see how this script journeyed from the page to becoming a defining national theatrical event.
Interestingly enough, the play didn't start on a stage at all. Back in 1953, it first created a sensation when it was broadcast as a radio play on All India Radio. It actually caught the ear of theater director Satyadev Dubey, who instantly recognized its incredible potential. And amazingly, Dubey walked around with this script for nearly 10 years trying to get it produced, before finally just staging it himself in Mumbai in 1962. But it was in 1963, when the script was passed to theater doyen Ibrahim Al-Qazi in Delhi, that the play truly made history.
Now, what's really interesting here is the sheer genius of Al-Qazi's staging. See, many directors initially thought the play lacked physical action, but Al-Qazi strongly disagreed. He argued that the action of the play was actually inward growth. So rather than using a traditional stage, he mounted the production against the monumental backdrops of Delhi, specifically within the actual physical ruins of Firoz Shah Kotla and later the tiered steps of Purana Kila. Just think about the power of that for a second, presenting a tragedy about a ruined, ancient, burning kingdom directly inside the tangible ruins of a real empire. It was a metaphor literally brought physically to life. This singular production brought in a completely new paradigm. Andha Yug became the standard bearer for the theater of the roots movement in the 1950s and 60s, which urged artists to look back into Indian epics and myths for inspiration and form. That 1963 production was such a massive national event that it was even attended by Prime Minister Jawaharlal Nehru. It definitively heralded a whole new era in modern Indian theater, and for this one singular play, literally the only play he wrote in his entire career, Dharamvir Bharati was awarded the prestigious Sangeet Natak Akademi Award in Playwriting in 1988. As we enter the final act of our explainer today, we arrive at Section 5, Redrawing the Lines. What does this play ultimately demand of us? So the crucial point is captured beautifully right here. Listen to this. I suddenly understood he can change the course of the stars. The lines of fate are not carved in stone. They can be drawn and redrawn at every moment of time by the will of man. It's so powerful because despite the immense tragedy, despite the ruins and the blindness of society, Bharti insists that human will matters. Redemption and goodness are always possible. Our fate isn't just locked in some downward spiral of violence, unless, of course, we choose to let it be. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought to take away. As we look around our world today, which is full of its own conflicts and atrocities, we really have to ask ourselves, when faced with atrocity, will our society succumb to the cruelty and cynicism of a blind age, just caught in an endless cycle of revenge? Or will we find our moral center, reject the logic of the moment, and choose the redemptive path of wisdom? It's a profound question that Dharamvir Bharati asked back in 1953, and honestly, it is entirely up to us to answer it today. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive into Andha Yug here on The Explainer. Keep seeking, keep learning, and I'll see you next time.